Please welcome director Stephen Soucy and the great James Ivory. Okay, hello everyone. Well, thank you for this lovely movie and congratulations on the great run you've had for the past year, has it been?
Yes, thank you very much.
I had the good fortune to see it almost a year ago at the Palm Springs Film Festival. So this is my third time seeing it, and I just get more from it every time. It's really quite wonderful. And I know it makes us all want to go back and rewatch every Merchant Ivory film, which I've been doing as well, and that's been a delight. So let's start with the most obvious question, which is how did this film come to be?
So I met James Ivory through a mutual friend, Peter Cameron, who's the novelist of The City of Your Final Destination, that novel. And Peter is featured here in the film. And I wanted to make a short film about the music in Merchant Ivory films. And there's actually a clip featured here in the film. And that became a 5-minute animated film, which I called Rich Atmosphere, the Music in Merchant Ivory Films. Jim provided the narration for that film. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of keep, going back to Jim and showing him, well, here's what I have now, and here's what I have now. And so I was able to kind of form, relationship with him. He loved that short animated film. And I sensed an opportunity, and I just went for it. And I said, you should let me make my take on the definitive look at what Merchant Ivory accomplished in their long partnership. And I went for it. So, I started traveling and gathering my interviews, and it took me a little over 3 years to make the film from beginning to end, and a little bit longer if we count the time it took me to make the animated film. But yeah, it's just an incredible opportunity for me. And really my kind of overarching goal with this film was to really preserve cinema history and to capture these voices, the people, the Merchant Ivory family that worked with Jim and Ismail, in many cases, film after film after film. I just couldn't believe that nobody had, attempted to do this before I hit the scene.
James Ivory is a subject of the film and also a producer of the film. I'm curious how you set the boundaries between those two roles and if there was ever a conflict.
No, there weren't. There really weren't. No.
No, there wasn't.
I just let him get on with it. You can't mess around with other people's art.
It's a great attitude.
It was great for me to have that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and so, but I kept returning, and I would show Jim, Act 1, a first cut, and then I would come back again. I'd be like, oh, well, this is what I have. Here's where we landed in terms of structure. Structure was it took us a while to figure out the best way, to tell this story, such a long amount of time, to cover, and then so many films. So you have to make choices, and eventually my editor, John Hart, who is just so important and integral to this process, John and I figured out that we should pair each kind of most well-known film with each person. And so once we hit that, then it all kind of fell into place. And I knew I had to explain what Merchant Ivory was at the beginning and who they were, and kind of set the stage, and then we kind of went from there in mostly chronological order. But Jim was incredible to work with. There were very few notes that he would give me. One thing that was important to him was he really wanted to make sure that I covered Ismail as a director, and that was something that we put in there as well, and that was important. And there were a few things that he had notes on, for sure.
Jim, did you have reservations about being in the film? And was it frustrating for you not to be in control?
He didn't always have the best light on me.
Right, we just talked about that before we got out here. He's like, yeah, I didn't really care for a couple of those.
I mean, there are better angles.
Yes.
That's all.
There also
It's just in the realm of vanity.
Yeah, well, that's important, in movies especially. You seem very relaxed in front of the camera and a bit reticent, but very natural. Do you like being interviewed, or do you prefer being behind the camera?
I don't mind being interviewed, and I just, it's part of one's life. And if you live it to be as old as I am, then you get interviewed more for some reason. I would think it would be less. But,
There's more to interview you about.
well, I suppose.
And sorry, Stephen, do you go?
No, I was just going to say, and this film coming out and having kind of the long, kind of wonderful play that it's had, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you know, people do want to talk to Jim, and they do want to kind of revisit a lot of these Merchant Ivory films, stories, you know. So it's been one of the great things about making this film is that it really has, you know, caused this renewed interest in Merchant Ivory, and in several places where the film has been programmed, many film festivals have added 3, 4, 5, 6 Merchant Ivory films for like a retrospective. You know, Palm Springs did that. You know, they showed 5 films. So yes, that's been one of the most wonderful things to come out of this film.
There's so many films in your filmography, and some of them I hadn't even heard of, I'm embarrassed to say, but which are the ones, 1 or 2, that you feel have been overlooked that you would encourage us to take another peek at?
I mentioned that in the film. It would be Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, I think, because it's the most autobiographical in a way. So I like it for that reason, and not more than all the others put together. And it isn't like that, but that's one of the ones that people don't seem to know very well. And the reason for that is there's no distributor for it anymore, so it doesn't normally get seen.
I saw it when it came out. It was beautiful, but I mean, it had some play because of Paul Newman and Julie
Right.
Woodward.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of distributors, we share a distributor that went bankrupt. Cinecom, when The Times of Harvey Milk came out, about the same time as A Room with a View, Cinecom went bankrupt, and
Yeah.
that didn't serve either of us
Yeah,
well, I imagine.
yeah, exactly.
Stephen, a question about the interviews. I thought it was courageous and somewhat audacious to include that somewhat prickly response from Vanessa Redgrave.
Yeah.
And appreciate how you contextualize that with your narration.
Yeah.
I wonder what the deliberation was around whether to include that and how to include it.
I talked to Jim, and Jim said I should include it. I mean, that was one of the, you know, I think in a very respectful way. I mean, she, you know, a little bit of the story behind that is she at first didn't want to do the interview, and then through some email back and forth, we were able to convince her to, you know, and Jim kind of jumped in and helped with that. And she didn't have a chance to look over my questions before I arrived. And when I started to engage with her and ask, you know, the questions, she just shut them down, and she was like, "That's a horrible question. I'm not answering that." So there's a lot that I did not put in the film, but it was helpful in just. You know, just she's notorious for being difficult in interviews. Like if you Google it, there just are countless stories about how tough she is. But I gotta say, you know, she came around. So once I was able to ask her, you know, like, you know, about the Boston Conservatory, and you know, she kind of, you know what we see in the film, she really kind of brought it down. And then, I mean, when my small crew left and it was just her and I, you know, alone, you know, she grabbed my arm and she's like, "Hey, Stephen, I just want to tell you how much I enjoyed that." So again, it was up and down, up and down, up and down for the whole hour and a half that I was there. But yeah, I mean,
That's what she enjoyed.
What?
That's what she enjoyed, I guess.
Enjoys
I think
abusing
so.
her interviewer.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit of background on that.
And should we assume that Anthony Hopkins just doesn't like to be interviewed?
You know, Emma Thompson Emma Thompson enjoyed the interview that I did with her, and I asked her if she would reach out to Anthony Hopkins and ask him if I could interview him, and she did. She emailed him, and he just said, "No, I'm not one to go back in time and talk about previous work." And then again, as I show in the film, there was a little rocky ending to his relationship with Merchant Ivory, but he had just such amazing roles in Merchant Ivory films. So,
Can you talk about the decision to narrate the film yourself?
that was more. I guess that's a larger question around the financing of the film. Like this was largely a self-funded endeavor. I really struggled to get money to come in at various periods. That's why it took me 3 years. So my editor John and I, we made the decision that he would record me and I would narrate it. But I would say it was mainly because of financial issues. I kind of felt forced into doing it.
It works. I mean, it feels very personal.
Yeah, I didn't realize all that.
Yes, yeah.
No, it's good. It's your film. Why not talk about it?
Yeah.
I love the fact that you pay so much attention to craft, and how could you not when you're taking on a subject like a Merchant Ivory film. Just the way in which you give attention to the composers and the writers and the costumers and all of that. Was that always part of your approach?
Yes, absolutely. I just felt the people behind the camera on Merchant Ivory films were just as important as the people in front of the camera. And Merchant Ivory is unique in that there were many, Carol Hemming, who did hair and makeup, was on every Merchant Ivory film from somewhere, the Europeans or the Bostonians, all the way through to, and still, to The City of Your Final Destination. She did every single film, and her husband Simon, who's in this, was an associate producer from the Bostonians, all the way through. And so, yeah, and people like 3-time Academy Award-winning costume designer. Oh my God, I'm gonna forget her name. Jenny Bevan. How can you not? I wanted to know more about, I wanted to visit Cost Prop and see that costuming house in London, and they just do TV show after TV show after TV show and film after film after film. And so that was fascinating for me as a fan of Merchant Ivory films, and I thought it should be included, and I tried to give as much time to that as I could. And then you mentioned the composer, Richard Robbins. For me, those scores and those soundtracks were just so important to my own creativity, listening to those over and over again. And so I felt like everybody kind of knows about Jim, Ismail, Ruth, and I just felt like I was very happy to be able to kind of shine a light on Dick Robbins and his vast contribution.
Jim, you started in documentary, if I'm
Right.
right,
I did.
and moved into scripted features. Can you talk?
I did. I shot 3 documentaries. One was a documentary about Venice, and then I made, and this is how I got involved with India. I made a documentary about Indian miniature painting, which I suddenly discovered at an art dealer's in San Francisco. I never had ever seen them before or knew anything about them, but there they all were, spread out on some tables in an art gallery in San Francisco. And I just was intrigued by those, and that led me to making a film about them. And then, because I had made a film on Venice and that film, I was given a grant by the Asia Society of New York to go to Delhi and do a kind of historical portrait of the city of Delhi. And while I was doing that, I then met Ismail. And so I continued and finished that film, but we then decided to make a feature.
And did your work in documentary inform your work in
I think it
fiction?
always does. I mean, I'm big on facts. And the way things really, I mean, I say that, but I'm like any film director, I'd throw the facts out the window if I needed to. But I'm big on facts, and yeah.
And what about the craft?
Well, sure. I mean, craft is everything in movies.
Right, but the craft of documentary, I mean, how is it different? How is it the same?
Well, the big difference is I didn't have to shoot it myself. I had a cameraman, a really good cameraman, one of the world's greatest cameramen. It was Ray's cameraman, Soucy's Ray's cameraman. That was Shribota Mitra, made many of the best films of Ray, Pather Panchali, and I mean the whole Apu trilogy and so many.
Yeah.
And he became my cameraman.
Wow.
On my first feature. And what's this experience been like for you, Jim, revisiting 50 years of...
The what?
What has the experience of being out with this film been like for you, revisiting your life's work?
Well, I mean, I've agreed to travel quite a few miles, including today, to get here, and you know, let's hang on.
We're grateful you did.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's been wonderfully supportive of this film. And, you know, that's a gift. I mean, it's, you know, it's really kind of helped it, you know, move along. But I think he's also asking, like, how does it make you feel to, like, see, like the whole arc of what I show? Do you have it, like, anything?
Well, no, I enjoy it very much. And, you know, I have to tell you, tonight is the first time that I saw the whole film from beginning to end, through to the end. The first time. And there were a lot of things there I hadn't seen.
Well, we will talk about it. But we were at the Berkshire International Film Festival, and you saw the whole thing there.
No, I never had. I had not seen the whole thing from beginning to end until tonight, I promise you. It's true.
So we're going to talk about that.
No. I was
You'll
very
let
pleased.
us know.
Very pleased, yeah, with the stuff that was there.
I think we have time for a few audience questions as well. Yes.
I just have a very, I live on the border of Wales, and every time we cross over to Hay-on-Wye, we stop and we remember that scene with the sun and the car in Remains of the Day that you shot that. How did you find this little spot in the world which you can see 3 counties underneath Office Dyke and the Black Mountains? It's such a beautiful, beautiful scene. But how did the location...
It's an incredible shot. It really is, I have to say. Every time I see it, I'm really thrilled. But I didn't find it. It was a location scout must have found it. Someone that we were working with. And we had several of them on that film. And they found it. And also, it was perfect for the time of day and the kind of weather. And it's just one of those things that happens rarely, that you're there in time for it.
It didn't rain.
And, huh? Yeah.
It didn't rain. Impossible.
Yes?
Yes.
I want to know, was it hard to get the rights to Room with a View?
Question was it hard to get the rights to Room with a View?
Not really. No. I think they were the Forster's estate at Cambridge in England. They were surprised that we didn't want to do, you know, the famous one.
Passage to India.
Yeah, Passage to India. Why didn't we want to do that? But we had just made a film set in India in the 20s, which was Heat and Dust, and it was still playing in theaters, and I didn't want to make another one set in the 20s in India. And I wanted to do, I hadn't been back to Italy in years and years and years. And I just wanted, the idea of going to Italy again and filming in Italy was very, very important to me. And I wanted to do that. And So we decided to do A Room with a View. And we went to King's College and told them that's what we want to do. And they said, well, surely you don't want to do that little novel. That's such an unimportant little novel. And we said, yes, we do. And that's the one we want to make. And so they said, okay. After,
I think it's important to make movies in places that you want to visit.
yeah, I do too. Very much so.
Like you guys in Cuba.
For example.
Room with a view is very important to me.
Well, and certainly to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you to you both, you gentlemen. I grew up, I'm not that much younger than you, Mr. Ivory. But I did grow up seeing your films at intervals, and I loved them. I feel as if I know you. Even, you did come to my mother's house for Thanksgiving or Christmas different times, house on 92nd Street. But we didn't talk. In any case, I feel as if I know you, and I'm most appreciative. And to the director and producer, thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm always interested in the backstory and.
Speak up.
What's that? Speak up. Oh, okay. I'm always interested in the backstory and inspiration. You mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. How is it that you came to the Newmans?
Well, it is quite an interesting story. The Newmans were great friends of Maria St. Just, Lady St. Just, who's a lot is known about her even over here, and they were her great friends. And I was having dinner with her, and at the same time, the Newmans were there, and I had never met either of the Newmans. Joanne Woodward said at this dinner, well, she was about to do a TV version of Mrs. Bridge. And I didn't know that, but I was already interested in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, but hadn't really got serious yet. And she said that she was going to do this, and then I said, oh gosh, it would be so wonderful to make a movie of those novels. There's a Mrs. Bridge and a Mr. Bridge. It would be so wonderful to be Mrs. Bridge, and then Paul said suddenly, and I'll be Mr. Bridge. And there we were. And that's what happened.
And I think Ruth loved those novels, right? Ruth loved those.
She loved those novels, very much so, but they were really difficult because there's very little dialogue in those novels. And she had to write all the dialogue, practically all the dialogue. And that's also true of one of the Henry James novels. There's very little dialogue in The Golden Bowl. And you would think probably there would be tons of it, but there isn't. And Ruth, it's not that she complains. She didn't complain of having to write Henry James's dialogue, or but it's those books don't have it.
Yes.
Why did you choose to interview Jim in a hallway and not in a beautiful room on a sofa?
Because sometimes because we probably shot 4 interviews in the house, and it's really funny. As I was setting up that day for that final interview, you may not remember this, but I wanted to set up in the living room in front of a fireplace, and I had already shot there for like a 15-minute film festival, video that we did, so again, I was kind of all over that house, and that's actually, it is a narrow-ish hallway on the second floor, but it's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. And so we decided to go up there, and that's what he wanted. He didn't want to be in front of the fireplace. And so sometimes we had to negotiate things like that.
And you had all kinds of angles there because you could go up and down and all sorts of things. It was-
So
it was-
I took advantage of that location as much as possible in that tight space.
And I actually have a follow-up question about the interviews with Jim. Did you have a core interview and then in the edit see where there are areas you needed to go into more depth, or how did you decide when you're...
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the first interview I did with Jim, we really just focused on like Richard Robbins and the music of Merchant Ivory films, because that was the interview that I used for the narration that I put together for the animated film. And then the next interview I covered probably the 4 core films. And then the next interview, I decided to go into the early years and the Indian films. And so it really was, and then I would kind of double back and try to get information that I didn't have from the last interview. So it really was kind of a building of interview after interview. But then that last interview where, you know, he talks about, you know, his relationship, you know, some of the more personal information, that was our longest interview, and he had published his memoir, Solid Ivory, that had come out maybe like 7 or 8 months before that final interview. And I said to Jim, you know, I'm gonna ask you these questions because you put it out there and it's in the book and I feel that I really need it for the film. And so that last interview kind of was more of a core interview than I was thinking it was going to be. But yeah, I mean, there were 5 interviews in total that, and they were all, I mean, more than an hour. But what I do have is, you know, obviously there's, like I said earlier, you make so many choices when you're putting together a film, and you know, we only get 2 minutes of Emma Thompson. Well, my editor and I have kind of edited down many of the interviews that I secured for the film. And so if you go to merchantivoryfilm.com, there's like a little bonus area of the website where I have like a 26-minute version of the Emma Thompson interview. And I have Helena Bonham Carter for like 15 minutes and Hugh Grant for a lot longer. And you know, and even Vanessa Redgrave. And, you know, and so, you know, so I really, that was important to me. And those 5 interviews with Jim, we did the same thing with those. So if you want to hear Jim talk about a lot more of Merchant Ivory, those interviews are edited and they are up on the website that accompanies the film.
It's a great archive. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, here in that area.
What is your next film?
Question was, what is your next film?
I don't think there's a next. I don't really think there's a next film. I don't know that I have the I don't know. Well, stamina I'd have. But I don't know I'd have the interest to carry on a whole film. I don't think I could. I mean, let's see.
What are your creative endeavors of late?
Well, I've been doing a lot of writing, which gets published in various places. So I do that.
About?
All kinds of things. The most recent thing I wrote was which was published in a dating app. It was about growing up in Palm Springs, or not growing up there, but living in Palm Springs when I was 13, which was the year that the war started, Second World War. And I wrote a lot about that, and for some reason it just interested me. And it ended up.
Where can we read that?
Oh God, what is the thing called? Well, it's a thing in England. It's published in England. I don't know what it's called.
We'll Google.
Yeah.
Let's see. There was one more question here. Yes. Yes.
Looking back on the body of your work, the core films that you're best known for, when you were directing them, did you have a sense of how wonderful they were at the time that you were making them, and that they were going to be the iconic films of your life?
No, of course not. Absolutely not. No. I mean, I was very interested in making them. As I said, it was wonderful to be back in Italy and that kind of thing. But no, I didn't feel anything like that, no. And in fact, so much of filmmaking is just such an awful wreck. You know, you do it and it just looks terrible, and you wonder why the hell you've done it, and what you're going to do to save it and all that kind of thing. And I had the same problems with those films that I had with all the other films. There are those kinds of problems, and you just think, oh my God, what is this?
Well, I think you said to me once that you kind of never anticipate anything. You make the film and you just put it out there and you hope for the best, but you know, it either connects or it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hope for the best.
Right, right.
You know, at every
You never
stage-
think about it
at
being a
every
box
stage.
office. Yeah.
Huh? I know. I never.
Yeah, you never think of it being a box office success.
Never. Usually, I think it won't be.
Well, they certainly are iconic and stand the test of time, so thank you for this incredible
Thank
body
you.
of work.
Thank you.
And thank you, Stephen, for
Yeah,
this
thanks, guys.
wonderful tribute.